Hello, my name is Robert Burgess from the Rowallane and Slieve Croob Community Twinning Group. We believe passionately in promoting local history and have commissioned a series of online lectures by the historian Horace Reid. Horace has been researching our history in County Down since 1990. He often publishes in newspapers and is a frequent speaker to local history societies. Over the years he has compiled a wide range of richly illustrated slideshows. We are grateful to Newry Mourne and Down District Council for supporting this important historical project. I shall now hand you over to Horace, who will introduce the presentation.
In this video I'm going to tell the story of the development of Ballynahinch as a town, and my method will be to describe the buildings as they were erected in each historical period. So I start off up here at Magheraknock Fort with the prehistoric period. Then I go on to the Plantation period. Then I go on to the Georgian era. Next, after that, I tackle the Victorian era, and that is when Ballynahinch developed fully as a market town. After that, I talk about the 20th century, and about mid-20th century, Ballynahinch transitions away from being a market town to being a dormitory town, a town where people came to live. And that expansion of housing continued into the 21st century, where there's been a remarkable explosion of housing. So I will start here up at Magheraknock Fort in the prehistoric period, and then I'll work through the rest of the periods of history. The title of this video series is Ballynahinch Buildings, a Chronology. So it's not a history of Ballynahinch town, but it is in a way, because if you give a list of Ballynahinch buildings and give a date for when they were erected and you say who built them, then you're halfway to giving a history of Ballynahinch. It's a very big topic. It covers a lot of ground, so you can't cover it in one video. So what I do is split it into 4 videos. And I'm starting off with part 1, which runs from the year 900 to the year 1800. And that covers the prehistoric period, the medieval period, the plantation, and the Georgian period. So here's where it all starts up on top of Magheraknock Fort. Magheraknock Fort was put up certainly around 900, maybe earlier, maybe around 600. Ireland is covered with what are called raths. So raths are farmsteads built by farmers. They are a ring ditch built of earth, and they're for a single farmer to keep his flocks in. There's a ditch built about 10 foot high and a ditch outside that about 10 foot deep. So the oldest building in Ballynahinch is Magheraknock Fort, and here it is up on top of the highest drumlin in the countryside. And we'll run a bit of video from this site showing you how it commands the surrounding countryside. I'm going to do the prehistoric period for Ballynahinch, then the medieval period, then the plantation, and then Georgian. After that I go on to the Victorian period, when Ballynahinch becomes a market town. Talk about partition and the effects on the town. Then I go on to the 20th century, and finally the last period, our own time, the 21st century. So here's where it starts with Magheraknock Fort. You see a line of greenery at the top of the drumlin there. So what you're really looking at is, if you imagine you're looking at a saucer and you're seeing it edge on. So this is a circle of greenery actually surrounding the circumference of the summit of the drumlin. So it's a 2-acre ring fort. The drumlin it's on is the tallest in the district. It rises to 500 feet. The rampart of the fort is 10 foot high and the ditch outside is 10 foot deep. It was occupied maybe as early as 600, but certainly around 900 they discovered a one-sided sword up there, which dates it to 900. At present, the earth rampart is overgrown with trees, so it's a bit hard to see what you want to look at. But you see with the arrow there, that gives you, if you look through the trees and look at the earth bank, that gives you an idea of the height of the embankment. So this is the oldest man-made building in Ballynahinch district. And it's a conspicuous landmark. Here we are in the suburbs of Ballynahinch, looking a mile and a half out towards Magheraknock, and you can see Magheraknock Fort outstanding on the horizon. So conspicuous now and conspicuous when it was in occupation. All of these raths were built between 600 and 900 AD. And at that time, Ireland was covered in woodland, it was covered in forest. But the early Christian farmers would clear their raths. So this hill here would have been cleared of vegetation. They would clear all the trees of it to use for building their habitations. And they would clear the land so that it was clear for grazing and it was clear for grain production. So you would have a bare drumlin, bare vegetation in the middle of a sea of trees. So it would stick out and be quite conspicuous. Now, Magheraknock Fort is unusual. Early Christian man, and this is the early Christian period if you're talking 600 to 900. Early Christian man quite liked building farms on drumlins. If you think of it, that was before you had roads, that was before the woodland was cleared. So the space between the drumlins was flooded and boggy and was no good for vegetation or for transport. But the drumlins were good in that they were always drained, they wouldn't be flooded. So we wouldn't think of them as good farmlands, but in the early Christian period, this was a favourite area for building your farmstead. It always drained and didn't get flooded. And it was good enough grazing for cattle, and it just about supported grain production. But the early farmers didn't build on the top of a drumlin. The top of a drumlin was too exposed, so they would build on the side of a drumlin. So when you build right on the top of a drumlin and it's very steep and it's the tallest one in the district, you start to think, well, was this a farmstead or is this a fortification? Is it designed to defeat a military invasion? So there's a bit of an argument about that. And it's at an unusual height at 500 feet. Most raths are below that altitude. To get the best idea of how the thing was constructed, I got some drone footage, and I'll show you that drone footage now. And that shows you what this is. That is a circular enclosure semi-fortified on the top of a drumlin. And again, Magheraknock is untypical. It's unique. It's very large. The typical rath is only 100 foot across, but Magheraknock is 300 foot across. So it's a total of 2 acres. So it is not your usual rath, and you wonder, well, what was it really? 310 foot in diameter when the average was only 100. Large, 2 acres. It's on a hilltop, not on a hillside. So does that mean it's defensive? Was it a tribal headquarters? It wouldn't really have worked as a fort. If you've got a perimeter of 1,000 feet, that's very hard to defend. There were royal raths, but they would have had a double ditch or a treble ditch. Magheraknock is just a single ditch. So it doesn't look like a defended fort. So the archaeologists now agree that it's best viewed as a large rath, that it's a stockade for cattle. So if it's 10 times larger than the average rath, so that means it would handle 10 times the amount of cattle. So you need a lot of herdsmen to look after the cattle. And this wasn't a beef herd, it was a dairy herd. So you need a lot of milkmaids. So an ordinary rath supported a population of about 8 people. So if this one is 10 times the average rath, that's a population of 80. So at a time in history when there weren't any towns and you'd only prototype cities, then if you had a population of 80 on top of Magheraknock Fort, then this was an early prototype village in County Down. Here's a map and plan of the fort. A diameter of 7,800 feet. Could accommodate 10 standard raths, and if you had 8 persons per house, you'd have a population of 80 up there. At this time in Irish history, you had about 150 clans, Irish clans, populating Ireland. Each of them with a king and or a mini king, and all of them busy fighting each other all the time. And the fighting took the form mostly of cattle raiding. So at this time in history, wealth was expressed in cattle, and you had to be careful that your cattle weren't rustled. You had to take the cattle out to graze on the pastures during the day. But if you left the cattle loose in the fields overnight, then the next morning they wouldn't be there. Another tribe would have rustled them, and by the time you woke up at dawn, they'd be 20 miles away. So the only way to survive as a cattle farmer in the early Christian period was to build a stockade and to bring your cattle in at night and keep them behind that stockade. So it wasn't a stockade built of fencing, it was a stockade built of an earthen wall. So it'd be easy to break down a fence, but you'll not break down a 10-foot rampart. So these raths aren't very good at keeping out an armed enemy. They wouldn't keep out soldiers, but they were very good at keeping in cattle. And if you look at the way Magheraknock Fort was constructed, when we went up there to take the video, we went through the entrance. You can see marked there, but that's not the original entrance was in the southwest corner. And if you look at the map, there's a chicane at that southwest corner. So if your enemy jumped the rampart at night and tried to drive your cattle away, he had difficulty. He would have to drive them through a narrow entrance. And there was a chicane there, so he could only get the cattle out one at a time. So this answers the question of what was the function of Magheraknock Fort. So the answer was it was a very large cattle stockade. And looking closer here, you can see that a lot of civil engineering went into building it. The rampart is 10 foot high, and then you can't quite see it there, but there's a 10-foot ditch in front of where I'm standing. So quite. If you're an enemy and you have to climb that hill, which goes up at a 30-degree angle, and then you have to come over a flooded ditch, and then you come over a 10-foot rampart, it's really quite difficult to get into Magheraknock Fort and try to rustle some cattle. So on three sides it's fortified with a rampart and ditches, and on the western side it's a sheer wall that's hard to climb. So like I said, the surrounding forest would be cleared. That permitted the farmers who lived in the Rath to graze the ground and to grow crops. Looking among the Raths from this period, very few of them show any sign of attack or burning. So I think that means that they were a successful defensive feature, that once you brought your cattle in there at night, an enemy raiding decided it wasn't worth his while trying to get the cattle out. Now, I labelled this the prehistoric period because for a long time we knew nothing about this period, and we didn't really know what happened up at Magheraknock Fort or in any other Rath. If you ask farmers around the district and there's a Rath on their farm, they'll tell you they'll tell you it's a Forth spelled F-O-R-T-H, and they'll say it's built by the Danes. So that's the anecdotal explanation for Raths. But archaeology has caught up with the myths now, and we know what these Raths were, who built them, and what their function was. So if there any wood to be found on a Rath, it can now be dated by radiocarbon dating. If there's any vegetation, it can be dated by radiocarbon. If it's any wood, it can be dated by dendrochronology. And you actually know what crops were grown in the prehistoric period, because you take a drill and you go down through the soil and you find a pollen core, and the pollen will tell you what was grown when. So that lets you know with a lot more certainty what went on in Raths and in Magheraknock Fort. Taking all of Ireland, the Drumlin Belt in South Down, west of Slieve Croob, was a very popular area for building Raths. For the reasons I've explained, a drumlin is well drained. It's not like the valleys between where they're boggy. So there, in the early Christian period, there was farming. It was cattle farming, not beef but dairy. You had sheep, and you cultivated grain. It was a system of grazing, so that you rented land from your local king. And if you had a herd of 7 cows, then you grazed them for the season, and the rent for the season was 1 cow and 7. So the king was making a bit better than 10% on his investment. On a Rath, the women folk, they ground grain, or they wove cloth. They wove cloth from wool or linen, and the population had woodworking skills and metalworking. We know they had metalworking skills because they had tools. And they could make large metal objects like the coulter for a plough. In 2011, up the top of Glenarm, they discovered a rath which hadn't been touched for 1,000 years. And when they excavated it, that let us know exactly what farmers got up to on an early Christian rath. So here is the occupation units, the residential units that they lived in. Now they used hazel branches to weave a wall. So it's a wickerwork wall. You put up a circular wall, and then what you did was follow up with a second circular wall round the first one. So this was a hut with cavity wall. And then you stuffed the cavity with moss or hay or whatever. So you had a cavity wall insulated hut. And then for a roof, you used rushes or straw or heather. All highly inflammable, of course. So you needed a hearth, but you put the hearth on stones in the middle of the hut. Now, to finish with, you plastered the wickerwork with mud. It's called daub and wattle, and that made it windproof. Now, a hut made of vegetation like that wouldn't last too long, maybe 20 years. So you always knew it had to be replaced. So early Christian man always had a hazel wood plantation nearby growing, and then he would pollard the hazel trees. So you had plenty of rods growing to replace and build yourself a new hut. Here's the top of Magheraknock Fort. In our day, we know it's the tallest drumlin in the district because there's the Ordnance Survey triangulation point. You'll note that the occupants didn't try to flatten it. They didn't try to level the surface. It's still got a round dome top. So if you flatten the surface, then the water would tend to collect. So no, they left it with the original domed configuration, and if it rained, so what? The water would still run off downhill. I'm now standing in the middle of the fort, and behind me you can see an Ordnance Survey triangulation station, and marked in it is the height above sea level at 494 feet. So the Ordnance Survey knew that this was the highest drumlin in the district, and ancient man knew that as well. So the height of the drumlin made it difficult to attack. The other thing was that the height gave you a terrific view of the countryside, and if any trouble was looming, you would see it at an early stage. It would be interesting to know how the people who lived within this enclosure were housed. There aren't any masonry remains of the foundations of houses, so that must mean that the housing was wooden. But even wooden houses leave traces. Archaeologists can uncover post holes. But the trouble is that the top of the drumlin here was available for agriculture, and it has been ploughed numerous times in the modern era, and then that wipes out all archaeology. So there's a lot we'd like to know about the people who lived in this enclosure, but that's left to speculation. I finished by saying that it must have been a glorious place to live, because if you look at the view that I have at the moment, living up here, you can see right over the countryside. You can see Slieve Croob, you can see Slieve Donard, you can see you can see Edenavady Hill near Ballynahinch. You can see Dunmore Mountain. At least up the top of the hill, you had decent views. Last thing I'm going to say is this is an attractive historical site, but be warned that there is no public access. This is private land. The other problem is that the livestock grazing here are an aggressive species. So if you come here, you'll put yourself in physical danger. So summing that up, if you want to know about Magheraknock Fort, examine it from a distance with binoculars, or go onto the internet and look at it through the satellite, but don't come here in person. There's no public access, and you'll put yourself in physical danger. You see how it's the tallest drumlin in the district, and it commands the landscape. So you get a view all the way to the Mourns and all the way to Slieve Croob. The landscape wouldn't have looked like that in the early Christian period. It wouldn't have been a few trees. It would have been trees covering the whole landscape. Here's the view towards Ballynahinch, and I'll show you a video panning around of the view that you get all the way from Slieve Croob to Black Mountain. Here's a view of Ballynahinch. It was said that there was a rath on top of every drumlin, and it was said that from one rath you could always see two other raths. So this is looking over at Edenavady in the Montalto estate, and sure enough, there are some prehistoric remains up on the top of Edenavady. And here's your view in the other direction, and you can see all the way to the Belfast district, Cave Hill and Black Mountain. So on a site which is dominating the whole countryside. Where are the raths close together? Well, here's a few close by Magheraknock. There's one in Ballykine, which is at a crossroads called Tweedies Lunens. And then there's one farther away, 5 miles away, on the far side of Lough Ochary, Ballykine. And there's an aerial photograph of Ballykine. You see it's only got one rampart. So where you see a rath with just one ring of fortification, that generally means that the purpose of that rath was to enclose and protect cattle. Up in Dunbeg, you've got Dunbeg Fort, and it's got a double rampart around it. So where you see more than one rampart, that generally means that the function of that rath was to defend people rather than cattle. And if you go to Scarva, to a rath at Lisnagrade, it's got a triple wall round it. And inside you find the remains are a bronze bowl, a spearhead, and bronze arrowheads. So that's a very prosperous community. So they build 3 walls to defend people and their valuables. But it lets you know the purpose of Magheraknock, that the primary purpose of Magheraknock is to protect cattle. At this period, civilization was developing to this point. The raths were built about 600 to 900. They were usually for a single farmstead. And there weren't any other units of residence. This was the kind of residential unit that everybody lived in. It was the only unit that a farmer could survive in. Christianity had arrived in Ireland for 400 AD, so this is the early Christian period. The coulter plough had been introduced to Ireland by 300 AD, And then the mould board plough, that's the one which turns a furrow over. It came in 600 AD. Oats arrived in Ireland about 800. So look at that combination of oats arriving and the plough arriving. That means that you can sow grain in the summertime. You put it through a kiln in the autumn. You keep it dry, and then it'll feed you during the winter time. So now, for the first time, you're guaranteed food in the winter time. With guaranteed winter food, the population grows, and then the population makes more demand on agriculture, and agriculture expands. Literacy developed. There weren't local records kept, but people did begin to write and record history. But literacy would have been confined to the ruling class, the kings and their bards, and confined to the church. Like I said, there were about 150 clan units over Ireland, each busy fighting each other, but a population of about 300 each. So a clan would consist of a king, then the nobles below him, then a clan of warriors, and then the tenants paying rent to the king. They had a system of law, as I explained to you. They worked out a method of rent for the pastures, 1 cow in 7. A king, as well as being king, he arbitrated in land boundary disputes. There was planning law, so that it was stipulated that a rath had to have a house that had 8 beds in it. So that was 6 for the family and 2 for the servants. It would have a barn, a grain kiln, enclosures for cows, for sheep, pigs. Calves were kept separate. These were dairy herds. So you wanted the milk to be reserved for humans to make cheese. So the calves, after the initial period, were kept away from the cows. Magheraknock wouldn't have been a unit on its own. It would have been subject to a king. And if you think of it, there had to be some overall supervision. There had to be an entity, an administrative entity, powerful enough to assemble a workforce to construct an embankment as huge as the one at Magheraknock. There had to be an overall king in charge of that, and paying the expenses of the workmen. The nearest royal rath to Magheraknock is an industrial estate outside Lisburn called Lissu. So in the middle of that industrial estate is the remains of a royal rath. So in the top photograph you can see the size of the mound. Bottom photograph you can see that it was a pretty big area. Now the king belonged to a dynasty who started off in Downpatrick, and he built this rath about 882. And he was so rich that he put a roof over the entire rath. So there's a picture top left of the rath with the roof on it. Now this is one of the few raths which could burn down. So it was burned down in 1004. So Magheraknock had to be subject to a king, and it might have been this king in Lissu. Finishing off talking about Magheraknock Fort, don't go wandering up there to take a look around. It's a very interesting archaeological site, but the owner keeps livestock up there, and he warns you that they are aggressive, so he doesn't want visitors. So if you want to have a look at Magheraknock Fort, then go at a distance and inspect it with binoculars, or go onto Google Earth and see what it looks like then. If you want to read about the raths of this period, then you get the hold of Matthew Stout's book on the Irish Ring Fort, revised 2023. E.M. Jope's book, Archaeological Survey of County Down, or get that big book published in 2011 about the Deer Park Farms raths. Will tell you in very great detail about life on an early Christian rath. Right, that was the prehistoric period. Now we come on to the medieval period, and this is Old Magheraknock Parish Church up the Crabtree Road. And if Magheraknock Fort is the oldest building in Ballynahinch, then Old Magheraknock Parish Church would be the second oldest building in Ballynahinch. And we can actually date it because it turns up mentioned in the taxation of Pope Nicholas IV in 1292. So in 1292, Pope Nicholas sent forth a decree that all the world be taxed, and Magheraknock was included in that taxation. It was rebuilt in the 1400s, the archaeologists will tell you, and it was rebuilt in 1607. We know that because it's got a foundation stone on the wall of 1607. And this was the parish church for Ballynahinch from 1660. The Anglican parish church for Ballynahinch from 1660 to 1772 when the congregation moved to the church road. In the medieval period, the McCartans were the dominant family around Ballynahinch in what's called the barony of Chronology. So you'll see the McCartans marked in this map here at one red arrow. To the left are the McGuinnesses, who were their allies. The McCartans, they were in charge of Chronology. The McGuinnesses, they were in charge of the Mourne district. So this map was completed by an Englishman, 1580. And his ambition that McCartan's country, he said, was full of woods, water and good land, and it was meet for Englishmen to inhabit. So the McCartans had other ideas, so they didn't want Englishmen invading the place. The McCartans lived at Magheraknock in Ballynahinch, Magheratimpany, Loughlin Island, etc. So what we're seeing there is that Magheraknock Fort continued as a stronghold after the prehistoric period into the medieval period. It was occupied by the McCartans. So the McCartans weren't too keen on the English arriving, but they came nevertheless, English and Scots, and they established or tried to establish a plantation in County Down. So there were long periods of warfare trying to establish that plantation. Started off under Queen Elizabeth, and she tried to start a plantation under the Smiths in the Strangford Lough area. The plantation proper in Ulster got going under James I, an influx of English and an influx of Scots. And there was that happened in the early 1600s. The native Irish population made a strong attempt to expel those settlers about 1641. That invited retaliation from Oliver Cromwell about 1650. So you had long, in trying to establish the plantation in County Down, you had long periods of warfare and counter-warfare. So after Cromwell conquered the place, one of his civil servants, Sir William Petty, mapped the whole of Ireland. And this is the first time we get a map of Ballynahinch. So there's Petty's map on the left-hand side. Here is the enlargement for Ballynahinch district. And you see all the familiar names in 1655. Magheraknock, Ballynahinch, Kilmore, Magheradroll, Magherhamlet, Loughan Island. And of course the barony of Kinlarty. So after all those wars, there wasn't much left of Ballynahinch. So Sir William Petty said there are no buildings in this parish to be seen beside the walls of the church of Magheradroll and a thatched house at Ballymagheraknock Fort, that's Ballymagheraknock North, and some cabins. The cabins he listed were three cabins in Ballynahinch, all Irish, and three cabins in Magheradroll, all Irish. So at the end of the period of warfare, there were very few, there was only a small population in Ballynahinch, and nobody from the plantation survived. It was back down to an Irish population. He mentions that there was only the walls of the church. So that's I showed you the photograph of the church. That is old Magheradroll. And he said there was a thatched house in Ballymagheraknock Fort. That's the one marked on the left-hand side there. Not Montalto House, but the site of where Montalto House would be built. So that's where Phelim McCartan lived. So you're at 1655, you're well through the attempted period of the plantation. So the plantation isn't having great success in Ballynahinch up to that point. But that is when Sir George Rawdon acquires the Kinlarty district. And Cromwell dies, King Charles II takes over, and Sir George Rawdon obtains the Ballynahinch town charter from King Charles II in 1683. So whatever was in Ballynahinch previously, and I'm not sure quite what Ballynahinch consisted of in the medieval period, but certainly Sir George builds a new town. So either he founds or refounds Ballynahinch. So the charter says he erected a considerable town, he built 2 mills, he put the parish church into repair, and he set out a large paved marketplace. Now you can see the difficulties that the plantation had in Ballynahinch. And if you were the sexton of Magheradroll Parish Church, you'd have known what the difficulties were of establishing the plantation in Ballynahinch, because the ownership of the parish church changed hands at frequent intervals. 1607, it was Presbyterians who worshipped in old Magheradroll. 1641, it was taken over again by the Catholics. 1650, under Cromwell, he brought in his own clergy who would have been Baptist. James II invaded County Down in 1689. Magheradroll reverts to being Catholic. King William wins the Battle of the Boyne in 1690. Magheradroll reverts to being Anglican. So pretty confusing for the sexton at Magheradroll. He doesn't know what prayer book to put out on a Sunday morning at times. There's the puzzle of the date 1607 on Magheradroll wall. So one explanation is that the Burns rebuilt the church at that period for the McCartan family. And in return for that, the McCartans remitted the Burns rent. Then there's another explanation that in 1607, Sir Arthur Chichester, in charge of the government in Ulster, wanted Catholic churches to be converted to being Protestant. So Magheradroll originally a Catholic population. It was taken over as an Anglican foundation, but you couldn't get an Anglican clergyman or an Anglican population. So central government settled for putting a Presbyterian congregation into an Anglican church. Now this sounds very unlikely, but actually that's what happened in a number of districts in County Down. Same thing happened in Colinchie, where the Reverend John Livingstone was installed in the parish church, but he was installed as a Presbyterian. And the same thing happened in Sainfield, where the Reverend Hutchison was installed in the parish church, but he was a Presbyterian. It was an arrangement which never lasted too long. You tried to make the Presbyterians convert to being Anglicans, and of course that didn't work. So, so there are two different theories for why there's a date stone of 1607 on Old Magheraknock. For the plantation period, you heard that Sir George Rawdon established a marketplace, and there's the marketplace. And the charter allowed him to hold a market on Thursdays, and that was 1683. He was granted the charter, and hundreds of years later, we're still holding the Thursday market on Sir George's marketplace, and always did. Here in the Victorian times, you saw the market being carried out on the square. It wasn't mentioned in Sir George's charter that you had a Presbyterian church in Ballynahinch. This isn't the present one. This was the predecessor to what is now First Ballynahinch. So the first Presbyterian church in Ballynahinch was erected in 1650. Sir George didn't get here until 1670. So the Presbyterians got here ahead of the Rawdons. And we don't know where this church was, but we know what it looked like, that it was whitewashed and that it was thatched. We still have the records, but like I say, unfortunately, we don't know where it was. So those are the features of Plantation, Ballynahinch. Again, the Ballynahinch plantation came under challenge. 1689, King James's Catholic troops invaded County Down, and the Protestant population of Ballynahinch all took to their heels and went back to Scotland or England. But the Duke of Schomberg then arrived, 1689. The Protestants reappeared. Ballynahinch got back on its feet. We know it got back on its feet because prior to going to the Boyne, Schomberg billeted Colonel Herbert's regiment in Ballynahinch. And during their time in Ballynahinch, they ran up big bills with the pubs. So after they left, 6 Ballynahinch publicans submitted claims to the Northern Ireland office for all the beer tabs that hadn't been paid, and they're the names of the 6 publicans. So Ballynahinch in 1690 had got back on its feet, and it was able to support a regiment, one of King William's regiments, and it had at least 6 pubs. Right, so there we have Sir George Rawdon established a town, established a town in Ballynahinch. It was equipped with churches, and it was equipped with mills and equipped with a marketplace. Now, the Georgian period is when the town really gets going as a town. So first out of the blocks again are the Presbyterians, who always showed a lot of leadership in Ballynahinch. So they had a church, thatched church, built 1650, but the population was expanding. They needed a bigger church. So the Reverend John Strong in 1751 built this church here. Now it's T-shaped, So it's got three aisles radiating from the T. It's undecorated. It's called barn architecture. Presbyterians didn't want any decoration. So no stained glass, no statues, no images, just a plain building. They want to pack in as many people as possible, so they put galleries upstairs in the church. But if you put stairs into service of galleries, then that takes away pew space. So what they do is they put the stairs outside. So if you're late coming out of church and you can't get seated downstairs and you have to go upstairs to the gallery and it's a wet day, well, tough, you get wet going up those stairs to access the gallery. Another new building in Ballynahinch during the Georgian period was Montalto House. Now, the Roddens owned Ballynahinch, but they were based in Moira. But about 1760, Lord Moira decided to downsize. So he left behind Moira Castle and rented it out and built a newer, smaller mansion in Ballynahinch, 1760. And you'll see that Montalto House then was only 2 stories, only 2 stories high. Later it would be 3 stories. Once the Roddens arrived and became permanently resident in Ballynahinch, then they started to develop Ballynahinch proper. So it had been established as a town by Sir George, but Sir John, once he became resident, he developed essential features. So 1773, he built Ballynahinch Windmill. And here's the advert in the Belfast newsletter, 1773. Sir John puts up the finance to build the windmill. He doesn't run it himself. He leases the windmill out to a miller. So a miller rents the mill and makes sufficient profit to pay a rent to Sir John. Sir John, as well as building Montalto, he builds himself a private chapel for Montalto. He doesn't build that in the Montalto grounds. He builds it across the river on what is now Church Road. So after a while, he decides that to make better use of it, he'll declare that his private chapel becomes the parish church for the district. So he says, he instructs the rector to move the congregation down from Crabtree Road to Church Road. Now, a lot of the congregation don't like that idea, and they insist on staying up Crabtree Road. So Sir John solves that problem. He sends a workman up to take the thatch off the church in Crabtree, and that forces the congregation to move down. You needed a residence for the rector, so a glebe house was built. There's a 1797 map on the left-hand side. So you see Old Magheraknock Church at the bottom. You see the new Magheraknock Church at the top. And then in between you see the glebe house built for Mr. Ford. So we know where the glebe house was because it was later converted to the Millbrook Lodge Hotel. And if you go towards the lifts in the Millbrook Lodge Hotel, near that lift shaft, you'll see the old front entrance, and the old front entrance has got stained glass belonging to the Diocese of Down and Dromore. Also in Georgian Ballynahinch, you had a linen hall. One of the principal industries in any county downtown at that period was the manufacture of linen and the growing of flax. So I don't know what Ballynahinch Linen Hall looked like. This is what a linen market looked like in Banbridge, where you had arches for a building, and you could drive carts in there, and there was a weighbridge in there. Then outside the hall, you had drapers standing on trestles, and then all the weavers would come in. You see the weavers waving a web of linen, woven linen. They're waving that at the drapers, and the drapers are evaluating the quality of the linen before they decide to buy it. So that would have been the kind of activity that would have gone on at the linen hall in Ballynahinch. We know the site of the linen hall. It was where the present Firestation is now. And Lord Mora's agent, who is John Moore Johnson, Johnson lived at Rockmount up the Dromore Road, and Johnson's house is still there. So Johnson described the linen hall. He said, "We have a neat linen hall and a pretty good linen and yard market. On an average, it is reckoned that £300 weekly is laid out for cloth and yarn." And he describes Ballynahinch didn't make fine linen. If you wanted table linen or linen for clothing, then you would buy that in Lisburn or Banbridge. The site of the linen hall was where the fire station is now. In other words, where you see that tree halfway down Dromore Street. And we know that John Wesley, for instance, the founder of Methodism, preached in the linen hall in 1785. John Wesley was a happy, clappy evangelical, and he introduced the singing of hymns into church worship. So Ballynahinch Presbyterians simply were not having that. So when he turned up in Ballynahinch and asked to borrow the Presbyterian church for preaching, they wouldn't allow him in. So he went up to Montalto and asked Lord Mora, could he give him a venue, and Mora said of course, and he granted him the linen hall. So Wesley records that on the 11th of June 1785, about 11 o'clock, I preached in the linen hall at Ballynahinch to a numerous congregation. He was more welcome in Lisburn when he went straight from Ballynahinch to Lisburn, and in Lisburn he was allowed into the Presbyterian church to preach. Ballynahinch didn't have a building for Catholic worship at that stage, so Lord Mora allowed Catholics to worship in the linen hall as well. So that was the first mass station in Ballynahinch. So we know where it was. We don't know what it looked like, but we know it must have been big enough and watertight enough to hold a Sunday congregation. So I had an idea, and that's the late Stephen Barr on the left-hand side, the watch commander. So I asked Stephen, could I come down to the fire station and talk to the firemen about the history of their site. So we did a recording in the fire station about the fire station's history, and we'll play that recording. As far back as I can remember, this has been Ballynahinch Fire Station. And thinking back, the tender then was a wee Dennis, which was about half the size of this Volvo here. And the Dennis didn't have two-tone horns. It had wee bells on the top beside the driver, and somebody had to put their hand up and ring the bell. So it didn't go hee-haw, hee-haw, it went ting-a-ling-a-ling. Now that's the guts of 70 years ago that I remember that. But I want to go back further than that, 200 years, to about 1796, when this site was the linen hall for Ballynahinch. Now let me tell you about linen. This bit here is flax. And that's the way it comes out of the farmer's lint hole. And it's full of rubbish. And it has to be scutched. And when you scutch it, all the rubbish comes out of it and leaves you with the pure linen. So At the far end of the town, you had the flax market. And the flax market is where Hamilton Fold is now. And if you look at the wall round Hamilton Fold, that was the wall of the flax market. So the farmers all brought the flax there. Then it was handed on to the Scotch mill. It ended up with pure flax. They talk about flaxen hair, so that's the colour of flax. Then that bit was handed over to the women folk. And in their homes, at their own fireside, they spun this here on spinning wheels into yarn, into thread. So the whole family was involved. The farmer, he was involved out in the fields and with the lintholes growing the flax. The women inside were busy spinning the yarn. Then the yarn was handed over to a weaver, and the weaver, he would do a bit of linen about 50 yards long or 100 yards long. So the linen trade was very busy in County Down 200 years ago, and you would have known it if you were here in the 1790s, because every Thursday the weavers came to sell their cloth to the drapers, and the women came to sell their yarn to the weavers. And it was said that on a typical Thursday here, about £300 would have changed hands, which is a lot of money in the 1790s. So a lot of people going home happy after the transactions here, and a lot of families and family members, male and female, prospering. Now, going back another 10 years to 1785, the linen hall was used as a church building, and the Reverend John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, turned up here in June the 10th, 1785. Now, John Wesley was just starting off as a Methodist evangelist. So this was the first Methodist sermon ever given in Ballynahinch, and it was given on this site. John Wesley rode around Ireland and England on the back of a horse, and when he got to a new town, he would ask the local church, could they lend him the church, could he get into the pulpit? So when he came to Ballynahinch, the local clergy were not cooperating. They didn't want any of these happy, clappy charismatics coming to Ballynahinch. And the worst about the Methodists was they didn't use psalms and paraphrases. They sang hymns. So that was a no-no. So he wasn't allowed into a church in Ballynahinch. So off he went to Lord Moira up at Montalto and explained his difficulty. So Lord Moira was quite fond of Methodists, and he said, no trouble at all, you go down and use the linen hall for your service. So Saturday morning, 11 o'clock on the 10th of June, 1785, John Wesley preached to a large congregation on this site. Now that tells you that the linen hall had a large space indoors. And that wasn't the last time that it was used as a church. Back in the 1700s, the Church of Ireland congregation and the Catholic congregation shared Old Magheraknock up at the top of Crabtree Hill. They took it turns about on a Sunday morning. Now, if you think about it, if you're going to church on a Sunday morning and it's raining, and Old Magheraknock is a mile away, it's no fun waiting up that hill in the rain. So the two congregations got tired of that. 1772, the Church of Ireland, they opened a new church on Church Street, and it's still there. The Catholics, they took a bit longer. They opened their church also on Church Street, 1807. But in the meantime, the Catholics asked Lord Moira, could they use the linen hall to hold their services, and they wouldn't have to walk all the way up to Old Magheraknock. So Moira said yes, and this site was Ballynahinch's first mass station. Right, I've told you enough. So just I'll leave you with one thought. When you're out on a Tuesday night and you're practicing at the bottom of the Lisburn Street car park, you take a look up at the Methodist Church, renovated by Jimmy Anderson in the 1980s, and you think to yourself, Methodists, your show started in Ballynahinch Firestation in 1785. Another building in Ballynahinch during the Georgian period was the Market House. Foundation stone put in 1782, open for business 1792. Foundation stone put in, opened 1795. Damaged during 1798 by Colonel Barber's cannonballs, took the roof off it. The Roddens were strong Freemasons, so it was Freemason Lodge number 446 who led the foundation stone in 1792. And there's a testimonial from that lodge on the right-hand side, dated 1804. Interesting thing about Ballynahinch during the Georgian period, it had a system of higher education. Now, County Down was known as the most literate county in Ireland because it was full of Presbyterians, and the Presbyterians were mad about education. They wanted their population to be educated so that they could read the Bible in the original. So there was a very high standard of literacy among the Presbyterian population. Now this here is the manse attached to what was Second Presbyterian Church, and the clergyman was the Reverend Samuel Edgar. So as well as running a church, and as well as, this is a farm, so he has to run the farm. So as well as running a church and a farm, he runs a school. And it's not any old school, it's a classical academy. Now what's that about? Well, if you wanted into a university at that stage, you had to know Latin and Greek. So Edgar taught County Down students Latin and Greek to what's called matriculation level, so that when they went off to Glasgow to sit the matriculation exam, then they would pass that examination. That was his manse. The school itself was in the farmyard, so the double red door there in sunlight. That's where the school was, through those doors. And there's the interior. Lately, it was a stable, and you can see the horse collar there. And we've recorded some video of the whole farm, which we'll play to you now. I'm standing in a farmyard in Ballykine townland, outside Ballynahinch. This farm was rented about 1800 by the Reverend Samuel Edgar, who was then minister of the seceding Presbyterian congregation in Ballynahinch, the predecessor to present-day Edengrove. So the congregation rented a farm for him, and he ran the farm, and he ran the church. And then in the manse, he had boarders for a boarding school. And then in the red double doors behind me, that shed, he ran a school. Very busy man. Over here on my left, we see the clergyman's garden and the garden gate. So when he was tending his garden, he tended to keep his back to the road so that anybody coming past, he could pretend that he didn't notice them, and they wouldn't engage in conversation, and they wouldn't keep him back. He ran what was called a classical academy in the outhouse behind me. He had boarders, and the boarders stayed in the attic of the manse. A classical academy was one which taught Latin and Greek to matriculation level and which gave you admission to Glasgow University. So his idea was to teach young local Presbyterians, to educate them to matriculation level, and then they could go on and do a degree at Glasgow University. He had a great success at this, and it is said that you could go around the surrounding townlands and you would see and you could count 30 local Presbyterians who went on to be clergymen who were educated here at first at his academy. He was when Inst opened, that's Royal Belfast Academical Institution, when it opened in 1814, he was appointed Professor of Theology there. So that gave him a difficulty. What was he going to do with the school? So Inst said he could continue to run the school in Ballykine for a year, but he must take up his job at Inst. So the compromise was that for the first year, the Inst students came out to Ballynahinch. So that was the start of actual higher education in Ballynahinch. His assistant here in Ballykine at the academy was James Thompson. James Thompson also went on to be a professor in Inst. James Thompson was appointed a professor of mathematics in Inst. Very good at his job, a pioneer of mathematics. Eventually was promoted to be professor of mathematics at Glasgow University in 1832. So there you had two university professors being produced by this little academy in Ballykine. Next thing that happened, Thompson, when he was in Glasgow, he educated his two sons there, one called James, one called William. James became a professor of engineering at Queen's University when it opened, and William became a professor of moral philosophy, better known as physics, at Glasgow University. William became the most famous scientist of his day. His major achievement was to put the first transatlantic cable across the Atlantic to America. He was so well known that he was one of the first life peers, one of the first recipients of the Order of Merit, and when he died, he was buried in Westminster Abbey. Samuel Edgar's son, John Edgar, succeeded his father as professor of theology at Inst, and was one of the founders of the General Assembly, which was created in 1840. So counting there again, in the first generation with this little school here, it produced 2 university professors. In the second generation, it produced 3 university professors. And when you think of it, so far as higher education was concerned, you had one member springing from a dirt floor in Ballykine to a tomb in Westminster Abbey inside 2 generations. There were day pupils, but there were boarders as well. So the boarders, they slept upstairs in the attic where you see the skylights at the back. Now this was the academic standards were very high here. so that the Reverend Edgar turned out 40 Presbyterian clergymen from this little academy. So he prepared 40 students who all passed their matriculation exam, all went off to Glasgow, and all got their theology degree. That was only the start. When Royal Belfast Academic Institution was founded in Belfast, Edgar then closed down the school and became one of the professors of theology at Inst. His assistant in Ballykine was called James Thompson. That's James Thompson, top left. James Thompson also went off to Inst, and he became professor of mathematics at Inst. He was later promoted and became professor of mathematics at Glasgow University. The Reverend Edgar's son, top right, succeeded his father at Inst as professor of theology. James Thompson, who at this stage was now professor in Glasgow, had two sons. One of his sons became professor of engineering at Queen's, and then later joined his father at Glasgow as professor of engineering there. Another son called William Thompson became professor of physics at Glasgow, and James Thompson he was one of the first life peers, and he was described as the preeminent scientist of his generation. He was promoted to the Order of Merit by Queen Victoria. His most famous achievement was putting the first transatlantic cable, telegraph cable across the Atlantic. So you can see the academic standard of this wee school. In the first generation, it produces 2 university professors. In the second generation, it produces 3 university professors. And here's a bit of archaeology from the school. This is the mantelpiece from the Reverend Edgar's kitchen. So all of the students in turn carved their initials on the mantelpiece. So there's one James Rutherford, there's another one A. Smith, and then bottom right is yet another one, which is M. Edgar. So that bit of archaeology is still in existence, and I'll show you a video of the mantelpiece in more detail. I said that Dr. Samuel Edgar educated around 30 Presbyterian clergymen in his classical academy at Ballykine, or at least educated them to matriculation level before they went on to Glasgow University. Now, the only historical artefact which we have managed to rescue from that early 19th century academy is this mantelpiece here, which was in the Edgar Manse. And if you look at it closely, you'll see that many of his students have carved their initials on the mantelpiece above the fire. Now, there's a couple of pamphlets, and they're entitled Fasti of the Presbyterian Clergy in Ireland, a record of all the clergymen, where they served, where they were born, where they were educated. So if you look at those Fasti, and you look for county down addresses, you'll find quite a few clergymen within the vicinity of Ballynahinch and Ballykine. So at some stage, I want to spend some time deciphering these initials on the mantelpiece and seeing if I can match them with the names in the Presbyterian Fasti. Detail. Coming to the end of the Georgian period, Ballynahinch is doing very well. It's got a market house, it's got a linen hall, It's got 2 new churches in the town. It's got a new mansion house in Montalto, so it's really getting on its feet under the auspices of the Rawdons. And then disaster strikes. You've had after all the fighting during the plantation period, you had 100 years of peace. That was interrupted by the 1798 rebellion. And look what happened to the town. General Nugent burned the new town down. So 63 houses were gutted by fire and 69 wrecked and looted. So after all the efforts of the Rawdons to build up the town, at the end of the 1700s, the place gets burned down. Right, that's the end of the first episode of Ballynahinch Buildings. My thanks to the A.M. Jope for the Archaeological Survey of County Down. That tells us all about Magheraknock Fort. My thanks to Mr. David White, the owner of Magheraknock Fort, who granted me access, and my thanks to the late Stephen Barr for allowing me into Ballynahinch Firestation. In the next episode, we'll talk about Ballynahinch in the Victorian period and how it grows as a market town. What do you think of that?